Good morning, everybody. First, thank you all for being here. I'm very pleased with the number of you. Everybody seems to be awake. Everybody seems to be excited about the discussion today, and I appreciate that. My name is Andy Purcell. I am at TCS, and I will be hosting or moderating today's event and mainly letting everybody else talk. So we'll go through a few brief invitations to talk and to these folks tell you about themselves and introduce them. We'll begin with TCDI. Greg Michaelick provided our breakfast for us this morning, and let Greg spend a minute or two to tell us who he is. I'm just yelling to it. Oh dear.
Hey everybody. Whoa. Okay. My name's Greg Michaelick with TCDI. We're the breakfast sponsors, so please get a cup of coffee, get an everything bagel. We want all the food gone. Let me ask you this. How many people know who TCDI is? All right, we've got a few. Good. So we're based in Greensboro, been here for over 20 years. We're a legal technology company, so we work with Fortune 500 legal departments and law firms to protect their sensitive data. We provide e-discovery services, case management software, and now we have a cybersecurity practice, and we have a Tier 3 data center on site that we have to protect at all times. So we think that this panel is certainly something that's beneficial to help businesses know where even to start. You all have important data to protect according to certain, usually regulatory requirements, but we're really looking forward to this panel, and I know we're already starting late, so I'm going to keep my remarks short, but you'll learn a lot from Barry and these folks today. So thank you for being here. Appreciate your time, and speak with you after the event.
All right, we'll move on to our panel. We have quite a group with us today that I think we could probably all listen to for hours, so I really look forward to hearing what they have to say. First of all, we have Adam Schultz from the FBI, who, at least for me, is one of the ones I'm most looking forward to hear from this morning. Adam has been with the FBI since 2004. He has worked in the cybercrime department as well as white-collar crime. He's also worked a number of the different criminal areas as well as counterterrorism. So presently, he's the resident agent in the resident agency out of Charlotte and handles cybercrime throughout this area of North Carolina. Next, Garrett Baldziger is information security manager, works out of Wilmington, works a lot in the healthcare industry. What is most interesting about Garrett is not only is he a security analyst, but he also is an ethical hacker and holds that certification, can provide us a little bit of information from both sides of the equation. Karen McKeithen Shady is an attorney here in town with Connors Morgan. She began her career as a registered nurse before attending law school, and since then has been working with HIPAA and health law, and then also more recently in the security area. So it should be wonderful to hear from her and to hear her side of things, particularly with the HIPAA aspect. Barry Utesh is the founder and president of TCS. He graduated from UNCG with an information systems degree and has been using most of his career since then working through TCS and helping companies in this area, and particularly now working within security. So that's the panel that we have today. If we go over just a few glossary terms, there will not be a test on it later, but it will help us at least have a baseline as we begin our conversation. We all hear the term cyber criminal or hacker. It is a person who uses nefarious means to access your network via the internet, and they seek to steal information from you via those means. To go on from there, a breach occurs when they do access or they enter your network, and from there, they're able to take data away. So if they get into your network, you have been hacked. If they take information out, you have been breached. So you can be hacked without having a breach, but if you have a breach, by definition, then you have been hacked. So those will be a couple of the important terms. Ransomware, you're all familiar with, but a cyber criminal will come in, usually via email, possibly through other means, locking down your data so that you then have to pay them a ransom to release that, and they'll do that by encrypting the data, and typically they will release it if you pay, but the best way obviously is to have a solid backup to not lose any of that information. So those will be the terms we'll use today. I'm sure there'll be some come up that we all know and that we don't know, so perhaps we'll learn some more today. my role as moderator really is to keep things moving. I do have a series of questions that we'll be going through, as many of those as we can, asking our panelists, one or more of them, to answer each question. At that point, we will ask all of you begin writing down questions. Hopefully we will cover most of what pops into your mind. There will be a Q&A session toward the end. If even at that point we don't answer them all, please feel free to leave us that slip of paper with your questions. We will be sending out a video, and perhaps we can answer those questions as well, and we'll get to as many of them today as we can. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick off with the first question. We'll roll through as many as we get to today, and hopefully have some lively discussion as we go through. So the first one probably relates to everybody. It's, I have a small to medium-sized business. Do I really need to be concerned about cybercrime? Okay, isn't that something that really is a bigger deal for larger companies? And if we'll go ahead and start maybe with Karen from the legal perspective on that.
Well, the law doesn't look at whether you're small, medium, or large. They just say this is the law, this is what you have to follow, and this is what you need to do. So it doesn't matter your size. I deal a lot with healthcare law, and I'm sure y'all are all familiar with HIPAA. And HIPAA is the same way. It doesn't matter if you're a single one-person show, such as a dental practice, you still got to implement the same thing that Wake Forest Medical Center has to. So it doesn't matter your size.
Excellent, thank you. And Adam, your perspective?
Sure. I think the statistics are pretty consistent over the last couple of years that 60% of small and medium-sized businesses go out of business within 6 months after they've been hacked. So I guess the question is, you know, like if my company or my business lost $10,000, $100,000 in a hacking incident, is that going to affect me as a company? And I'm pretty sure that everybody would say it would, regardless of your size, that that'd be an incident. So I would say absolutely. And also when we're talking about you know, hackers, there's not one type. So sometimes they don't just target large businesses. Sometimes they target the easiest ones. So and see what they can get. So there's no one size fits all as far as hackers go. So I would say small and medium-sized businesses definitely need to be concerned about that.
All right, wonderful. We'll just keep down the line, Garrett.
So to add to what Adam said, hackers are people too. And by that I mean, if there's an easier route, they're going to take it. You know, I as a hacker, if I'm looking at, you know, gains, would I bang on a door for 3 months and try to get into a system where I'm going to take the layup and take the easy one multiple times to get the same net benefit there? So yes, absolutely. The unprotected smaller practice is probably an easier or more enticing target than the larger organization. You all, being small business owners, you all have time, which is money. You all have money, which is easily quantifiable, and then you all have data, which you just can't put a price on. So, you know, question really to answer your question with a question is, can you afford to lose your data? Can you afford to be down for any amount of time? And then, you know, you'll have to decide whether or not it's worth it. But from my viewpoint, absolutely.
All right, wonderful. Barry, what's from?
Yeah, much the same, right? The smaller company has a smaller budget. You know, the big companies have multiple people in their IT department and security departments. The small company obviously does not, and so you are a much easier target.
Excellent. Next question specifically for Adam from the FBI perspective. What types of cybercrime do you find that you're typically investigating, and what's the profile of that actor that you're investigating?
Sure. So we run the gamut as far as investigations go. If you're a company that's a CDC, a cleared defense contractor with the United States government, or you're a university doing research, you could be targeted by nation-state actors that are trying to steal intellectual property. If you're banking, you could be targeted by hackers with trying to steal banking credentials. Other malware tools could be used against you. And then if you're just a company that deals in day-to-day transactions, maybe they include wires. We're seeing a lot of business email compromises of businesses where routing and wiring instructions are stolen, and that can affect any type of business. So we see the gamut as far as cybercrime. As far as like the profile of a hacker, you know, probably the best, you know, Garrett would be a good person to talk about that, but also feel that, you know, sometimes we try to put them in boxes where if they're a hacktivist, you know, if there's somebody that is got a social political agenda and they want to deface a website, you know, where some testing occurs on animals, you know, that might be a motivation today, and then tomorrow, you know, they may be motivated some other way because they have to, you know, pay for things, so then they're doing ransomware. So you see some bleed over as far as profiles go. And then also with, you know, nation state actors, it may be somebody that's employed by the government, or it may be somebody that's not official government hacker, but maybe they do some work for them, or, you know, they do their own work and then try and sell it. So you got to be prepared to go with the flow as those kinds of things go, and not you know, one size fits all as far as the profiles. You know, again, we try to take a look at everything that involves, you know, illegally accessing a protected computer, and we kind of sort them into investigations based on, you know, what's the crown jewels of the company. Is it personal health information? Is it research and development? Is it something else? And we try and fit it to, you know, the best type of investigation to look into at that point.
Excellent. Let's do follow-up with Garrett, not only what kind of crimes you're investigating, but what sort of companies in the private sector do you find are most vulnerable?
I've worked for healthcare, I've worked for law firms, I've consulted with healthcare, law firms, auto body shops, I mean, everything. The plumbers, every industry there. And they all tend to have the same experience. You know, their hacked accounts, weak password, you know, they've been exploited from a phishing attempt or something like that, an email that they got, they clicked on a link, they answered a phone call that they got from Microsoft, you know, that kind of thing. And then I've also, probably extreme end of what I've seen is the ransomware attack that, you know, just consumed a whole business and shut them down for a couple of days. So, you know, everything from the minor and annoying stuff to the, you know, this could blow the business up completely. That's what I've seen from a small business perspective.
Wonderful. Karen, from your perspective, who do you see are the vulnerable targets?
Well, it's anybody that doesn't think they'll be a target. So, and I think that's all of us. We see it in law firms in the fact that if we're moving money back and forth, as Adam said, we now have to be careful about how we email instructions for wiring and different things. So it's, I also see it in smaller healthcare arenas where your physician doesn't think anything's going to happen to them, so they have their cousin who does their IT work, and then things always happen. You also see it in the mom and pop that, again, has their son that graduated from college a couple of years ago and probably knows more than I do, but that's who's doing their IT work, and they may know how to do certain things, but they don't necessarily know the security. And so, again, I think it's anybody that thinks they won't be a target.
Excellent. And Barry, what has TCS found to be a good target?
Well, again, everybody's a target. Garrett and I were talking before the event. 10 years ago, we were trying to help clients to avoid hard drive failures and you know, equipment and software malfunctions. Today, we don't even think about that. Everything is focused on security and ransomware, and that is the greatest threat to our clients' ability to operate. And it doesn't, again, there's no safe space out there, and there's no magic bullet to protect you. It's really a layered approach.
Excellent. And I guess the next question, that at least that comes into my mind, was, is it possible that I could have a problem, I could have experienced something and not know it? Garrett, in your experience, is that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You think about any problem that's ever been identified, made public, which is one that you would hear of, at some point it started out under someone's radar. It wasn't detected, right? Every problem starts out as undetected. Because honestly, if it was detected from the get-go, it wouldn't have been a problem, right? So, yeah, absolutely. And that's when you should be you should be concerned when things are going very smoothly. You should always have that awareness there, because what you don't know is what's dangerous. The attacks out there, look at it like this. If we look at the total number of viruses and Trojans and worms, what we call malware in general, all of them that's detected, those don't scare me because we know about them. It's what we don't know, that someone's out there right now, they're coding an application or a program to take advantage of a vulnerability that you guys have in your systems, and we just don't know about it. And so, absolutely, even when things are quiet, there are things going on in the background that you just can't see, you don't know of, and so you always have to be cognizant of that potential issue.
Sorry. Adam, I guess the same thing. By the time you guys become involved, are people usually pretty far down the path and just simply weren't aware of it yet?
Yeah, we come in at different points. I think a lot of times, with some of the outreach and stuff that I've been doing, people are reluctant to call us because they have some preconceived notions of what that means. I've heard concerns about press releases, things becoming public, and all of those things. Those are misconceptions about working with the FBI after a breach. But typically, if we're in communication before something happens, then when something happens, we have a full understanding of the company, what the concerns are, and things of those nature. So we come in at different points. A lot of times, bringing us in could potentially help your company with addressing some of the issues that are required by law. And it would depend by industry what we're talking about there. But bringing us in and having us work with you on some of these issues could be a benefit in that regards as well. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Excellent. Karen, from a legal perspective, what steps should someone take if they feel that they have had a breach occur?
Well, I would immediately notify, depending on what kind of company you are, I would immediately notify your insurance carrier and your attorney. Hopefully you've got cybersecurity insurance. But at the same time, I would be doing an investigation to try to figure out exactly what happened. In healthcare, which I deal with a great deal, there are certain steps you have to follow under the law as far as if you do have a breach, who it's got to be reported to, who you have to notify as far as patients, that sort of thing. But first step would be look at what happened, do that investigation, and notify your attorney and your insurance company, because from there that's gonna determine what you have to do in order for that coverage to kick in. And then depending on what it is, you probably notify the FBI. That's one of the things I've learned in the last year or two, to notify them if, especially with ransomware and certain things, so that they are able to track.
Excellent. Thank you for the segue. Adam, what steps should someone take as far as contacting your office and beginning to get you guys involved in the investigation?
Sure. I think the first thing that we would want you to do, and we would understand, is that you're required and you need to stop the bleeding and whatever is going on with the breach. So we want you to make sure you take care of that first. And then if you call our office, you can call the office in Greensboro or Charlotte, and let them know what's going on, and they'll be in contact with you, or they'll have an agent reach out to you at that point in time. And the conversation could easily just be something like, okay, we understand you have your hands full. When you have a minute to breathe, let us know, and then we'll come out and we'll talk to you about what's going on. The reason we want to know up front, or as soon as possible, is not because we do remediation, because we don't do remediation, but there may be some information out there pertaining to what you're currently dealing with that may help you, that we may know about from other victims. And we're not necessarily going to investigate every single case, that comes in the door, but the more, it's more of a community approach to IT security, in that if there's something that we've developed from another victim that could help you maybe recover some losses or prevent some losses, then we want to make sure you have that information. And we won't know that if you don't notify us that there's been a problem. So I would say, emailing us, and I'd be happy to provide my email address to anyone offline, and my phone number, or calling the office in Charlotte or Greensboro or Raleigh, and they'll send somebody to you.
Excellent. As we move to the remediation side of the panel, Garrett, what are your steps then, as we have identified a breach and they've contacted you? What's the process on your side?
So it's a pretty standard format for any incident. It's incident response. So you identify it first. That's the critical step, right? Being able to identify it, and that comes from your interaction. You being able to see this is a little anomalous here. Like my server doesn't usually act this slow, or doesn't present this kind of a pop-up, whatever it is. It's being able to identify that's critical. Maybe even you have software in place to do that. Once you're able to identify it, and again, hopefully quickly, you want to contain it. So in December, I received a call from a business, and they said, "Hey, look, I got this." Excuse me. They sent me a text first. Said, "Hey, I got this pop-up on my computer. Said your computer's encrypted. You need to pay a ransom." And said, call them, like, you immediately need to shut that computer down. That's the containment phase, because I know you have a problem, and it's a pending issue of spreading at that point. I know it's going to spread. So I said, you need to contain, which is the second step. Shut that computer down, get it off that network. And at that point, we need to continue discovery. So, going through the rest of the office, turns out all the other computers have been hit at that point, so it was too late, right? But because it had happened after hours, they weren't able to contain. So identify, contain, and once you've been able to contain, eradicate, And so we have to be able to go in and clean up the system, remove the threat. In this particular case, all 12 devices in their business were completely encrypted, and so they were unusable. So, there was no eradication, there was just recovery. And so then there's the recovery aspect. And then just as critical, but I think this step is left out a lot, is the after action report, or the review of the whole process, the lessons learned. Like, sit down, what happened? What happened to us? How did it happen? And how does this not happen in the future? How do we stop it from happening? So that's my generic format. It's worked well for me through incident response, and that's what I try to stick with.
Excellent. And Barry, from a local boots on the ground standpoint, what does TCS recommend as far as remediation and next steps?
So backup, and backup, right? If you don't have a backup, you're paying. And if you pay, there's no guarantee that they're not still there, and they don't still have a, some kind of a probe on your network. So a good solid backup strategy ahead of time is your best defense against ransomware or any of these types of breaches.
I'd like to add on to that. The only way that business that called me in December survived was because they had a backup. They had taken a backup offsite. That was the only source of data, of their company data, customer data, everything. QuickBooks, top to bottom. It was the only reason they survived, is because they had a backup offsite.
And the backup was disconnected from the network. Right?
Correct.
Key component, right? If that backup is hanging on the network at large, it would have been encrypted as well, and they would not have had a backup.
No, you can look at it like a fire. If the building had caught fire, everything within the building is compromised. It's completely toast, right? And so it's the same thing. If it had been in the building, it had been connected to the network, it had been gone. So.
Excellent. That moves us right into the next concept, which is what can I do proactively to avoid getting into that? Obviously, the backup is the great step, but I would say we start on the far end again with Karen. What can customers of yours do, or clients of yours do proactively to avoid getting into the situation?
We'll have some policies and procedures. I know everybody loves hearing about policies and procedures, but just have something in place. Excuse me, I've got allergies, but have something in place to how you're going to do things, meaning does everybody have a password? How often is it going to be changed? Who's responsible for what? What happens when an employee leaves? Do you disengage them from the system? Who does that? Depending on how large you are, if you have an HR department, they take care of that. If you don't, then more than likely, nobody's doing those kinds of things. Make sure you have something in place. If anybody remotes in, how you remote in, who has access to laptops that they take home, what kind of data is on that laptop, what happens when that laptop comes out of service, how do you destroy it? There's a lot to just how you're going to do things, as well as making sure that once those policies are in place that you actually follow them. Because I come from a hospital background and we had a policy on how to write a policy. So, it doesn't do you any good to have these procedures and policies in place if nobody's going to follow them, but that would be your basic, so.
Excellent. And Adam, what would you recommend to minimize the risk on the front side?
A couple things. I think one of the most important is employee awareness training. I was talking with a company that was a victim of ransomware, and when we were discussing how it initially affected the system, they knew exactly how it got in because that particular employee clicks on everything, in quotes. And so just having some training, awareness training, I would say if at this point you're not using multi-factor or two-factor authentication for emails, a lot of people are doing work email from their phone, offsite, or from home, and if you're not using multi-factor authentication on emails, then you probably need to get caught up real quick, because that is a huge deal, especially with business email compromise cases. We see a lot of those victims aren't using multi-factor authentication, so I highly recommend that. And then also, as businesses, you want to be out there promoting your company, your business, but a lot of times we put way too much online about ourselves, our positions, what our responsibilities are. It'd be interesting to hear what Garrett's take on this is, but almost every hacker is going to do a reconnaissance on your business before they attack it, and they're going to go to LinkedIn, and they're going to go to Facebook, and they're going to go to all these places where we put a lot of detail out there. So if that's a concern of yours, then regularly review your website, your social media presence, and just make sure that you're just selective of what goes out there to the world.
Actually, I was going to a great point with all the CEO fraud and some of the spear phishing attacks. Garrett, if you want to speak to some of the ways people are getting in that are fairly ingenious these days.
Yes. Of the whole hacking idea, the thing I'm most interested in is the people hacking. It's what I consider it, and it's it's hard enough to break into systems, and you could spend a whole lot of time doing that. But what's insanely easy is for someone to call up and say, "Hey, my name's Joe. I'm with the IS department or IT department. I need you to click on a link or something like that, so that I can fix the problem that your computer is having." And that doesn't take any technical skill, and it really doesn't take any work. It requires a phone connection and a little bit of, a conversational ability. So the phone threat, the unsolicited phone calls, that's always present and will continue to be. Phishing email attempts, they're getting pretty good. The attackers are getting pretty good at cloning legitimate emails from Microsoft and organizations. If they really, to Adam's point, if they really research and find out, what service provider you use, they may attempt to, spoof them or act as that entity in an email. If I were doing it, I would do a little bit of research. Again, like Adam said, I'd go on LinkedIn, I'd go on Facebook, I'd find out information about your business, I'd find out who you're partnered with, try to impersonate anyone of your contacts. I'd even create a fake email account. I might buy a domain name. Like if it's totalcomputersolutions.com, I might buy Total Computer Solutions with a different letter or something like an I instead of an L in the name. And then I might, again, this is highly targeted, but if I were to do that, then I could send an email to someone, and you know, all appearances, it would really certainly appear to be a legitimate email. Set up a fake website, that kind of thing. So it depends, you know, you as a small business owner are subject to the mass emails that are sent out, a dime a dozen. You know, it doesn't cost anybody anything to send an email out. It costs the same to send one email out as it does 1,000 from an attacker's perspective, which is $3 and 3 cents, right? So you're always going to be subject to those mass email attacks, but you're also very realistically a targeted attack. You're vulnerable to a targeted attack, just like larger organizations.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I got a lot to say about this one, if you don't mind.
It's your area.
I really like the idea that Adam mentioned about multi-factor authentication. If you want to stop somebody who has my skill set, you know, you have to button up the small things, the easy things, and first thing you always hear about in a security awareness training is passwords. Don't take it personally, but your passwords probably suck. They're not great. I get it. I understand that. Some of mine aren't great either. But you can't start focusing on the advanced stuff until you get the basic stuff out of the way. And so you got to get the easy stuff out of the way. You got to get your passwords in line. You got to change the default passwords. You know, just take care of the easy stuff. But probably the most easily attained advanced technical control that doesn't cost you anything for the majority of sites is that multi-factor authentication. That's priceless. Because even with
Explain to them what that is, just in case.
Okay, sorry, yeah, I did make an assumption there. So multi-factor authentication, your primary, when you log into a website, you log in with a username. That's who you say you are. I could say I'm, you know, anybody, it doesn't matter, but it's who I can prove I am. And that's how you prove yourself, your identity is, your claim to your identity is your password. Okay, so that's your primary factor of authentication is your password when you log into a site. Multi-factor means you have another way to identify yourself. So with multi-factor authentication, the most common one that you see now that businesses are implementing is the ability to send a text message. When you log in with your username and password, they'll send you a text message with a code. You then enter that code on the screen, and that validates in another layer through a multi-factor or a second factor of authentication, your identity. There are different ways, you know, if you're really, I don't have my keychain with me, but there are USB drives that you can use, that you can buy that will additionally provide another layer of security. But the text message thing typically is free, you know, and you've already got a phone. No matter how technologically adverse you are, you've got a phone. And so it doesn't cost anything, and it's one of the most critical things that you can do to protect your identity now, your email, and ultimately your business, or any web account is multi-factor authentication. So again, I would stress, don't miss the basics. Don't be so focused on getting that advanced software or buying this advanced whatever when you don't have the foundation there, you know, because again, if I look at you and I see a business that is hard to break into from one avenue, and I see another avenue here where your password isn't even, you know, isn't strong enough, and you don't have two-factor, I'm just going to take that route. You know, I'm going to break into your email account and then move laterally from there. So.
But Gary, that's such an inconvenience.
I know.
And a 15-character password, and then wait for a text that slows me down.
I absolutely get it. I absolutely get it. Again, you have to ask yourself, you know, what risk you're willing to accept. You know, if you're going to save yourself 30 seconds or a little bit of headache now, at the risk of saving yourself a lot of time, money, and headache in the future, then, you know, that's your choice. You know, I can't make you do it. I very much advise you to have that strong password. By the way, does anybody know what the minimum recommended password, my recommended password, because I'm sure they would offer a different recommendation. So anybody have a minimum recommended password length that they would like to guess or offer up? I heard 8. I just want to stick on that one. That was like 10 years ago. I did hear 16. I think that was the highest one. That's my recommended minimum. I know you're probably all thinking there's no way. And then furthermore, it's not using that same 16-character password over and over. It's having a different 16-character password for every service. Look, that's a perfect world. I get it. It's not going to happen in practice for everyone. But that's what you should strive to, right? Just a Am I way over here?
We're here to listen to you and not me ask questions, so.
Here's why. Everybody, any training you've ever had, I guarantee you has been like this. You should use a strong password. Here's how you use a strong password. But I'm pretty sure no one's ever told you why you should use a strong password, other than people could guess it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't guess passwords any better than the next person just through my mind. But 3 years ago, the company I worked for spent $5,000 on a computer that was specially built that I designed for cracking passwords. I was able to get 1.21 billion passwords per second out of that machine. Let me say that again, 1.21 billion passwords per second. That's how many passwords that computer could generate. All right? I'm interested in password cracking. I'm just interested in the mechanics and the psychology behind creating a password. That's why I'm very confident when I tell you your passwords aren't great. That system for a 9-character password would guess every possible combination of characters for a password within a day and a half at the most. So to put it another way, I have all your passwords if there are 9 characters or under. Okay? I've got them on my computer. That was 3 years ago. And the reason it was so fast was because of hardware advances. 3 years have gone by, hardware has grown exponentially. The capabilities have grown, right? If I spent that same $5,000, who knows? I may be able to get 2 billion passwords a second. And now 10 characters is attainable, right? So, you got to check the easy boxes, right? You got to check those before you start getting into the advanced stuff. Don't lose sight. Don't discount the password.
Thank you for that frightening story. I would like to ask what one of the secondary or the soft consequences of having a breach or having something that does go public. Karen, to you, what's the reputational impact on a company if they have a breach and that becomes publicly known?
Well, as Adam said, a lot of companies, especially small companies, will end up going out of business because not only depending on what kind of industry you're in, you may have fines you have to pay. According to federal and state law, in North Carolina, we have one of the most stringent identity theft laws, and there's all kinds of fines related to it, never mind the federal ones. Once you pay those fines and then it gets into the media, who wants to give business to somebody that's had a huge hack? How many of y'all quit going to Target when Target had their hack? I realize you probably did it for a day or two, but but everybody thought, oh, I don't know that I'm gonna go back to Target, but that can be devastating, and a small business or medium-sized business has a tough time recovering from that. So.
Absolutely. And now the last question in the structured component today is, as we finish up, what should we have as a takeaway? What one thing do you want us to remember from this conversation? And Adam, we'll start with you.
I would say have a continuity of operations plan now, so that you're prepared when it does happen. And if that means that you're going to go back to paper documents for a while, then at least know that's the plan and have that available. If it means you're just going to that you have a backup, off-site backup, ready to deploy, then great. But if you're not having a conversation within your company about what that continuity of operations plan is for a hacking incident, then I would start doing that now.
All right, and Garrett, for you, what would you say is the one takeaway you have us remember?
I read this question and I've been stewing over it for a while. I just don't know one thing I can tell you. If I could stress something, it is you are never going to be safe from hackers. Like you can never be 100% safe. It's just not going to happen, okay? So, and I say that to kind of shock you and get you listening, right? So you're never going to stop the hackers completely, but you can put yourself in a much better position. Look at security as a heading, not a destination. You're never going to get to that point of being 100% secure. The only way you're 100% secure is to unplug that computer, shut it down, and not use it. So given that, you constantly keep security in your focus, keep it in your, you know, not even in the back of your mind, because again, when it's quiet, that's when you should complacency is a bad thing. And so when it's quiet, you really, you know, still need to be concerned. So don't forget security. Don't let it get pushed to the back burner. That's what, too many times it's a reactionary measure and not a forethought. So don't lose sight of it.
Excellent. And Karen, legally, what should we take away?
Well, going back to plan, be ahead of the game and not behind. As these two were talking, make sure that security, you have that plan in place. And that part of that plan is having cyber liability insurance. We really hadn't talked much about that, but everybody is gonna have an issue. It's just a matter of when, and make sure you're prepared for that by having your plan in place, but also having that insurance.
Excellent. And Barry, from your side.
With all due respect, the weakest link in your network is between the chair and the keyboard, right? Train your users. Train your users. That's where most of the breaches, or most of the most of the hacks or whatever are invited in by a user. And so training that user is dollar for dollar the very best thing that you can do to protect your network.
All right, wonderful. That is the formal part. We are a little bit behind where we were, so I don't know how many questions, but if we have a couple, we can start with a couple of questions. I would remind everybody else, if you would write down your questions, we can get back to you with those answers. And then I will also say there's a comment card, so you each owe me two things. You each owe me a question and a comment card. But who has a question now? And I may have some front row bias, I'll be honest. So we'll start with that. And if you would use the mic for the recording.
So I have two questions, basically. What is the responsibility of the operating system manufacturers to harden their operating systems against these attacks?
You guys can jump in if you have an opinion, maybe the best way.
You want to take that one?
I don't, to my knowledge, there's not a legal requirement for them. I mean, they're offering you a service or a product, and you're buying it, and in that very nice end user license agreement, they're basically saying it's yours. Maybe there's an ethical or a moral obligation there, and certainly from a business perspective, they want to protect their system, because if they don't, then you're not going to use it. But I tell you, a lot of people miss this, and then this goes back to the missing the basic stuff. Microsoft doesn't put out updates for fun. They don't get paid off of them. Like they make zero profit on them, on those updates they push out. But they're intended to be installed to fix a problem, and you wouldn't believe how many people just don't install updates when they're out there, and how many people get compromised because they don't. So, Microsoft, everybody bags on Windows. 95% of the world, whatever, I'm going to guess there, uses it. It's going to be, from a hacker's perspective, I got a better chance of targeting it than any other operating system. I'm convinced. You can't convince me otherwise that Apple would have the same problems if they had as big a market share. So, to me, they're the same end result.
Yeah, I would add to that Windows 10 is significantly more secure and less hackable than Windows 7, right? So I know there's a temptation to not keep up with operating systems, et cetera, and sometimes there's legitimate reasons for it because software won't run. But staying up to date on operating systems and not lingering. Windows 7 expires at the end of this year. No updates, patches, or anything from that point forward. So again, same with your phone, right? You want to keep those operating systems up to date.
Not talking specifically about operating systems in general, but I think anytime a manufacturer is developing a product, they have a balancing act between promoting a new convenience associated with that product or the security. And anytime you add a new convenience, then you're adding permissions for that convenience to work. And so it takes some time for that vulnerability to be identified. And so when you're reviewing, well, what do we want to use? you know, you can do a handoff between your phone and your desktop computer via Bluetooth, right? If that's something that you feel like you need to have, but then there's vulnerabilities associated with that technology. So, you know, I think when you're deciding what you want to use is to do the research as far as, okay, what convenience is this adding for me or my company, and then what are the vulnerabilities associated with that? And if it's new, if it's something new, it's the latest and greatest, then it's probably not been fully vetted by the community. And I think you see with a lot of software developers, there's a push for open source kind of code that kind of promotes the hacker community, the white hat hackers, and the, you know, I forget what they pay for vulnerability finding. What are they referring to that?
The bounty.
Yeah, the vulnerability bounties. You know, it promotes the community to go in and really hammer away at that particular operating system or software program. And so I think there's kind of a push for developers to use open source stuff. So in my opinion, I think that's a good route. If you're looking at something, is it open source to the community to be vetted and to be tested? If it's not, then, you know, it might take a little bit longer to find all of the different vulnerabilities with it.
Thank you. My second question deals with, you talk about convenience. Seems like to me when this technology and computers were first introduced, they were supposed to make your life simpler and easier and convenient. But now it seems like it's less convenient. Small businesses especially are having to spend more money to protect themselves. I mean, where does this all end?
Yeah, we were talking earlier, there's security and convenience, and they do this, right? So the more secure you are, the less convenient it is. The less secure you are, right? And there's no easy answer to this. You have to decide, you know, for my business, we're willing to put up, you know, dual factor authentication is not convenient, right? But it is powerful to prevent someone from getting into your stuff. And so it's a business decision. I will tell you that if you are compromised, if you get ransomware, you can, and you have a good backup, you can count on being down a couple days. Just count on it. If you don't have a good backup, now you're either paying or you're losing all your data and starting over. And so, you know, you lock your business at night, you set your alarm, it's just another layer of security that you just have to do.
Excellent, thank you. Ben, I saw you, and I promised to get one from the right, so I look fair.
This question kind of also has two parts, but I'll give it to you all at once. I work with a lot of high earners, retirees who've built some substantial wealth. You mentioned small businesses as targets. What are a couple ways to advise your clients to protect their own cybersecurity, and how do you prevent them from being a backdoor into your systems?
Well, again, anybody who's on the computer is potentially vulnerable, right? Those folks also, you know, again, if you're thinking about a home computer, I'm assuming that, you know, that they do their financial stuff on. Are they backing it up? Are they backing up that information? Are they disconnecting it, right? So I have an external hard drive on my laptop at home, and when I run backups on. But when I'm done running a backup, I unplug it, right? Because again, if I was hacked, if ransomware attacked my computer, if that external hard drive is connected, it's going to move right over to the hard drive as well, and now I don't have a backup. In terms of the using you as a conduit, so again, my office is in my home, and then I have a VPN connection into the office, so there is a possibility that they could come through me and get into my office. That's exactly what happened to Target. Target wasn't breached directly. They have a huge, you know, IT department that's very secure. They came through a third party, a refrigeration contractor that had very weak security. So for businesses in the room that do business with much larger entities, they're actually starting to require a plan or they want to know about your security, and they recognize that you are a weak point in their security. So I don't know that I've fully answered your question, but if not, maybe we can ask someone else.
Your client, they're an individual, they have wealth, and how do they access that wealth? I mean, they access it through a portal somewhere. So they have to control what they can, right up to the point where it's not their responsibility anymore. Their bank, their whatever organization that holds their wealth, they're responsible for it on their side. What can your client do to protect their identity ultimately, which is what their wealth is tied to? So two-factor authentication is critical, absolutely critical for them, because that's the gate to their wealth, right? If anyone was able to connect up to their computer, remotely access their computer, all right, they've already got their foot in the door, but they still can't do anything unless they have that second factor of authentication available to them, right? So even if they get all the way up to the gates of the city, they're still standing there, like, you know, like they've gotten a long way, right? But they still can't get to where the gold is, right? So it's, you know, small businesses have tangible assets, they have a building, they have data, whatever. Your clients have wealth behind a portal, and they have to do everything in their power, and then some, to protect that access to that portal like it's everything to them, because it is. I got the same situation. A friend of, older couple, a friend of the family, they're retired, and I help them with that, because that's exactly, they live that scenario. He logs in every day and checks his stocks and all this other stuff, and I have to stress to him, like, that is everything to you. If you don't protect this, if you're not cautious with it, you're in a bad situation.
It was a great question on this side. All right.
Good morning. We are a small company. We do not have our own in-house IT staff. We do train our employees. We require the use of a password manager, 16-digit passwords with uppercase, lowercase, special characters, all of those good things. We do have a cyber liability policy, and what we have found is that, to the best of our knowledge, we haven't been hacked. But what we have found is that everything that we do is in the cloud. We don't keep anything on our server. Third-party vendors. We have had a couple of instances where privately identifiable information was breached, not by a hacker, but inadvertently. We had a third-party vendor that the state requires us to use that was doing some testing on a server, and the server was online, and Google crawled the server, and that was how the information got out. And so even though we weren't directly responsible for that, a third party was, what are your recommendations for dealing with third parties? And these are third parties that have SOC reports that get issued and are supposed to give you some level of comfort with your third-party vendors.
Exactly. We do. Adam and Karen, maybe for those two, since that's a tricky one.
I would have some kind of contract with them that they, in healthcare, it's called a business associate, and I would do the same thing in a regular general business, where they sign off that they're going to have certain security perimeters in place, and that they take some liability if the data is breached because of them and their neglect, and that puts some onus on them. And if something does happen and you get in trouble, that you can pass some of that liability on to them. I wouldn't just, I think we have a tendency, especially in the business world, to sign a contract and not really vet it like we should, especially, this is where I'll give a plug for my law firm, especially if we look at contracts all day and we think, oh, we know it. Well, sometimes there's the devil's in the details, and you may need to have an attorney look at it, because you need to set it up to where you have some protection for those third-party vendors.
And Adam, what do you think vetting third parties? What's the best recommendation you have?
Well, I think probably the biggest hammer is what Karen just said, the liability issue. But I would say if you have a choice in your third-party vendors, and it sounds like you don't in some of them, but if you do, is having, that's part of the conversation, is their security, how they address security, what they do to protect the information, and tying that in. I mean, I think kind of going back a little bit further is what do we need to have, or what would be nice to have, and what do we need to have? Because the more you have, and that includes like third-party support, that also means that there's more vulnerability there, as you've identified. And so if you don't need that, maybe take a look, review that on a regular basis, and then on a reoccurring basis also addresses the IT security aspect of that with that vendor. What are they doing different this year when you get ready to renew your contract than they did last year? And I don't know if they've had any incidents in the past year, if that's something they need to disclose. I don't know if legally you could ask them if Karen,
You can ask.
Yeah.
Whether they tell you, that's a different story, but you can always ask. And in healthcare, there's actually a website you can go look to see who's gotten fined. So there's really not that in business as far as general business. And we didn't really talk about it, but in the U.S., our security laws are nothing compared to Europe. And you know, in Europe, it's GDRP, I think. But you can't, you're responsible if anything happens with data, with personal identifiable data getting out. A vendor like that, they would immediately be liable. There would be no question. So it's so much more stringent in Europe than it is over here. So.
Excellent, thank you guys. I wish we had another hour. We could probably spend on answering questions, but I know some of you have business to run and work to do and security to ensure after we've heard all these. Thank you all for coming. As again, you've got two pieces of homework, a question, and then the rating card. Hopefully you've enjoyed what you've heard today and got something out of it. Thank you so much to all of our four panelists. Obviously this is here and we've all enjoyed because of your knowledge. So thank you very much for that. And obviously if we're able to provide you any service, any answers, let us know. I believe Ashley, who has hosted this event for us, is going to be putting out a video. We will lean on Barry to answer your questions that you turn in, and hopefully we continue to provide information and work together as we go forward to make sure that we stay secure. Looks like there are still a few bagels and some coffee, so thank you, Greg. Let's not force him to take any up at home with him. So thank you guys so much, and thank you.